on the basis of sex in schools that receive federal funding, including in their athletics programs. As introduced, this bill imposes additional reporting and publishing requirements regarding Title IX compliance on all District of Columbia schools. It will require all district elementary, middle, and high schools to submit an annual report to the mayor, assuring compliance with Title IX. It will also mandate that the mayor develop a 5-year plan to promote gender and racial equality within athletics and district public schools, as well as establish regulations that will formalize a grievance process. Lastly, it would require the mayor to designate Title IX athletic coordinators in each school and a citywide NCAA eligibility and athletic scholarship coordinator. I would like to note that this bill was also introduced last council period, and a hearing was held a little over a year ago. I believe that since that time, the Office of the State Superintendent, D.C. Public Schools, and the Public Charter School Board have attempted to work together to make changes to athletic programming in our schools. The makeup of the council and this committee's membership has also changed, enough that I believe it merits another full hearing, and that's essentially why we're here today. So I would like to thank all the witnesses who are here again to testify on this bill. I appreciate you returning. I would like to also say that the athletics and competitive sports offer both male and female students the opportunity to have an emotional outlet, learn discipline and control, master personal scheduling, and be responsive to constructive criticism. These are skills that are the foundation for both males and females to be prepared for the workforce and to become productive members of our society. We must ensure that we are compliant and transparent about how we allocate our resources for every child in the city. I look forward to hearing the testimony and engaging in a dialogue about the status of Title IX athletics in the District of Columbia and what we are doing and what still needs to be done in this city to best serve all of our children. So we'll first hear from public witnesses. I'm going to call up 3 at a time since that's how many chairs we have. So we will start with Jay LaValle, the chairman of the Maryland State Wrestling Association. Good afternoon. Terry Lynch, President Extraordinaire. Lauren Corey, the Associate Attorney for Korea and, I say, Puff. She's great. If the 3 of you would come forward, and Mr. LaValle, if you want to begin, that would be great.
Thank you, Mr. Grosso. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me. My name is Jay LaValle. I'm the chairman of the Maryland State Wrestling Association. We are the extension of USA Wrestling, the governing body of Olympic sports in the United States. And my organization essentially oversees the youth programs all the way from 5 years old through college and high school. And the reason I'm here essentially is because when I heard about this legislation and the council wanting to pass this bill, it intrigued me, because if something like that did happen in the district, obviously I know there's not that many public schools and private schools, but for my specific sport, wrestling, it would require, I believe, some cooperation with Virginia and Maryland, and I'm not sure if the Virginia representative here is here today, but I fully believe the sport of wrestling is very important in the lives of many people, not just boys, but young girls who participate in it. Having been a coach myself, in addition to being a leader of the organization, I've worked with many girls at every level, including Helen Maroulis, who was a world champ at the USA Wrestling level. So she attained levels all the way to the highest that she could possibly be. And the Olympic gold medal is her next step. But those dreams don't happen unless there's some sort of outlet and some sort of resources for these girls to start. She happened to have a family member who was a wrestler previously, and so it was easy for her to get involved. But the outlet she had was to actually wrestle other boys through her entire wrestling career. And I believe a lot of girls don't want to wrestle because they don't have that outlet to have other participants that are girls to wrestle with. So right now we're facing obviously a situation where many girls want to wrestle, but they're unable to because they feel like they cannot wrestle with the boys, or they feel like they'll get put down, made fun of. And so my testimony today is is really to push for having wrestling to be one of those primary sports that when the mayor's office looks at those numbers and starts implementing a plan over that 5-year span, to really scrutinize, look at wrestling. I got a fact sheet here. Wrestling includes more body types and sizes, more than any other sport, just due to the weight classes, and it really does. I mean, some sports exclude specific girls of certain sizes just because of the nature of the sport. Wrestling's not one of them. Wrestling's pretty low cost: shoes, shirt, shorts, and a wrestling mat. Most schools have wrestling mats if they already have a boys team. And in addition, wrestling skills develop, I believe, and broaden the horizons of many of these young athletes wanting to go on to college, wanting to attain Olympic dreams like Helen Maroulis at every level. And so there's many, many, many facts that are there for the sport of wrestling to argue on that side. And then I don't want to take up too much more time here, but benefits of wrestling, and I got a list here. I pulled these from the Presidential Council for Fitness, a study that was done a few years ago. But the physiological benefits, psychological and sociological, I got 3 bullet points for each one. I mean, these can go on and on. And this is not just for wrestling, but for girls in general. These type of things. So I got a couple exhibits in there. I pulled some numbers, but you can see the disparities and the proportionality is very unequal here. NFHS overall, that's National Federation of High School, and this is 18-year-old and younger. So you can see overall the number is very small, but when you look at wrestling, the number they got for wrestling, it's pretty high, and it's pretty even across the board. And if you look at DC, there was actually 0 girls wrestlers reported in 2013, 2014. So that was a little disturbing as well. And then the last page, Exhibit B, is just a testimony that one of the girls that I know in Maryland wanted to provide and share with you her experiences.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. LaValle.
Thank you.
Mr. Lynch?
Really,
Make sure the red light's on.
I really enjoyed the prior testimony because I do think it's time for a fresh start in D.C. And we can be a regional example. We can lead in equity regionally on inclusive sports for all. I come to this as a 16-year DCPS parent. Everything this bill addresses is what I experienced as a parent of 2 girls who went through DC public schools. Everything you hear about, facilities, coaching, uniforms, scheduling, girls got second-tier treatment from DCPS sports. The high school my girls went to, the boys team, they had a turf field to themselves for practices, centrally located on metro access. The girls were sent to the far west side of town on a turf field, often because of rain, practice would be canceled, plus they had to share the field with 3 to 4 other teams. Coaches, the boys always got the best. The girls team got so frustrated, we hired an assistant coach. Sure enough, next season, DCPS hired him to coach the boys team. So you name it, this addresses it. So want to say this is overdue, look forward to it passing. I think it can be strengthened. What I want to suggest is that you make sure that charter schools get included, and private schools, if it's not clearly laid out, they should be included. We're one city, and hopefully all our schools will be setting these kind of standards. So make sure charters and independents are included. 2, DCPS sports should be now consolidated under the very successful DC State Athletic Office. That has set a wonderful example with these state tournaments where charters, publics, privates are having great success with new rivalries through these state championships. We can have that throughout the season. So I want to suggest that we consolidate under the DC State Athletic Office to have one set of rules, one guidelines that everybody can play by. I would ask that you also strengthen it to have DPR, DCPS make sure that our student athletes, girls and boys, get to have first dibs on their fields. I found that frequently Wilson, Tubman, DPR fields were going out to suburban adult leagues for use prior to DCPS students. For some reason, they would get the best times and slots, renting it or whatever. So make sure DPR does that. Speed modernization of the remaining schools. A lot of our best schools don't have any athletic facilities. Banneker is left way behind. Walls has none with their kids on their campus. So speed the modernizations. Make sure also that there's some enforcement, that there's some teeth. I don't see any penalties in this bill. How do we make sure that when they do the reports that there's something that holds them accountable, that we can actually get it done? I have to share, I asked the chancellor, I said, we got to expand boys and girls sports. I said, can we get lacrosse? Can we get rugby? Can we get ultimate frisbee? Her response was, well, for girls it should be bowling and field hockey. That's the mentality of DCPS for sports. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. Ms. Corey. Good afternoon.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of this legislation. My name is Lauren Corey, and I'm an attorney with the law firm of Correa & Puth. And at Correa & Puth, we represent all employees in workplace discrimination actions, including teachers and administrators and Title IX actions. A key challenge in preventing and fighting discrimination is the ability for individuals to even recognize or acknowledge inequities, and that includes inequities in sports and under Title IX. This act would call for necessary transparency that would help ensure that families, teachers, administrators, and the general public have at their fingertips information that's essential to them, not only being able to utilize those resources, but also being able to remedy issues if addressed and seeking to have their rights fully enforced under the law. As you know, Title IX bars sex discrimination in education, but it also protects against retaliation. And that's in order to ensure that students and teachers and administrators that recognize something is going on have the ability to enforce their rights without fear of being fired, suspended, demoted, or even harassed in the cases of students. But too frequently at my law firm, we hear stories of teachers and administrators that raise issues under Title IX, whether in athletics or in the other areas that Title IX covers, like sexual harassment and violence, and they're retaliated against by their school for a whole host of reasons. I imagine because it's an issue that schools don't really want to deal with, and it really puts a target on the backs of my clients and on all of those that either experience or recognize discrimination happening in the school system. I want to share a story of one of my clients, Jay Flood, who was the volleyball coach at Florida Gulf Coast University. And as volleyball coach, she had the best win-loss record in the university's history. She was praised as Coach of the Year at the Atlantic Sun Conference, and despite all of the success, when she raised concerns about their Title IX athletic programs, they actively sought out false accusations to criticize her, and then she was fired. She brought a lawsuit under Title IX, and that lawsuit subsequently settled, but the point is that Jay is not alone in these experiences, and evidence and exposure suggests that retaliation is actually very common and far from uncommon. But this act that you've proposed, and we strongly suggest passage, would bring valuable athletic opportunities to our young women and girls in the district, and also protect against retaliation. By shining a spotlight on the inequities in these school programs, the whole community has the data that's available to understand their resources and raise issues in a way that I believe will be both effective for students and administrators, but also effective for the district as a whole to understand both what the reporting process is, what the data looks like, what resources are available, and that way both both the stakeholders and the district are able to have a conversation hopefully without litigation, and because that it will be an much easier process than what needs to happen now to receive data, such as a DC FOIA request. The Act also, which is really great, establishes regulations to formalize the grievance process to allow for the clear and efficient reporting. We would suggest that this formalized process is essential so that all individuals who have concerns know the clear and efficient ways to raise them. We would encourage the council to also include establishing in conjunction with this grievance process regulations that make clear that retaliation will not be tolerated and formalize the steps that schools should take to prevent and remedy retaliation when they have instances of it. Without these strong legal protections and safe reporting processes, discrimination will continue to persist, and those that take a stand against it are putting their livelihood at risk. These additions will really help ensure that the resources provided to students, our young women and girls in the districts, are equal and strive towards achieving that in compliance with Title IX. So thank you for the opportunity to testify. We urge passage of this legislation, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you. I appreciate all of your testimony. Mr. LaValle, one of the questions I have around the Title IX and implementation here in D.C. as it comes to athletics is, it's basically as a three-pronged test, I think, and one of them is interest and whether or not there's interest for something. And so how do you increase interest around wrestling if that's one of the goals? There's a question, and maybe you can help too, Ms. Kahori, the question of how do you get to the point where there's enough knowledge base around the sport that it would make it likely that there would be interest or not, right? So you can truly test whether or not there is interest. There must be some standard there, is there?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we're pretty lucky to be in a great hotbed area for wrestling. Maryland in particular, Virginia has thousands and thousands of participants and wrestlers, but the people that are within the district, I know at American University, where I'm also a coach, we have NCAA national titleists there who are coaches and All-Americans who, you put on a clinic and you put their name on it and
right.
You have an all-girls clinic. Girls are going to show up and they're just going to come out of the woodwork. There's also Beat the Street programs within DC being set up at this moment. DC USA Wrestling is kind of working tandem with Beat the Streets, with the Beat the Streets program, and so at the grassroots level, trying to increase membership and gain more interest from youth girls at that level. It's really reaching out in all areas, especially in our lower income neighborhoods, getting them out of trouble, keeping them out of trouble with the Beat the Streets programs. It's going to pull out interest at that level. Having those camps, those clinics that are girls only,
right.
In addition. But really, the knowledge of some of these expert coaches in the area will absolutely help, I believe.
Do you know, what's the kind of standard there from a legal perspective on your need to actually do the kind of recruitment that he's talking about? Is there a standard in place that's been tested in court already, or when can you say there's just no interest?
Right. So Title IX does require that a school district has to take some type of effort to evaluate whether or not there's interest, and then not just interest generally, but in what type of program. So whether or not there would be an interest in field hockey or in wrestling.
Right.
I've seen, and I believe DCPS has actually done this in the past, but school districts that have taken surveys, looked at the surrounding programs either in Maryland or Virginia or other localities to see the participation of females in wrestling as an example.
Right. But if you just did a survey tomorrow about what kids are interested in wrestling, not very many of them would say, I'm interested in wrestling. Now, if you do it a week after you have an all-girls clinic led by some top-notch Olympic medalists, then that's a different question altogether, right? So when is the requirement? Is there any requirement that we do some sort of community education effort first before we do a survey, or no?
Well, it's a holistic requirement. So the individual hypotheticals that you're proposing, to my knowledge, haven't been tested in court, but the analysis under Title IX calls for a holistic approach. So it wouldn't be enough just to say, we took the survey and there was no interest. You have to come back and say, well, we've done these education programs and the no interest is founded in a good faith effort by the school district to evaluate.
I think that's the standard. Okay,
Right.
That's good to know. Thank you. Mr. Lynch, your question about does this apply to other other sectors?
Yes, charter schools and independent
This law
private schools.
will actually apply to charter schools. It doesn't apply to private schools. It's a question of Title IX application to any school that has funding. And that's a tough one because if the privates don't have any public dollars, it's hard to tell them what to do. Now, my assumption would be that if the District of Columbia puts the effort in that I think we're already starting to do and that we need to continue to do at a high level, what you will see is a clamoring of desire from parents and from students to want these programs, and you'll see that the private schools will have to start responding.
Yes.
And that'll be a different approach than, it'll be a whole, the whole question of a high tide rising all the boats. That's what will happen if we put the effort in, and I believe that wholeheartedly.
Yep.
Your point about Ultimate Frisbee is well taken. I love Ultimate Frisbee. I played it for years. But one point about that I think is important to note is that as far as I'm aware, there are very few college scholarships for Ultimate Frisbee out there, unfortunately. There should
That's
be.
what I said about bowling.
Yeah, well, that's right. So the question
As
is,
facilities of bowling in the city, when they said to me, we got to have bowling, I said, where are they going to practice?
where they practice, yeah, right. So the question is, I would think that equity also includes the opportunity to go on to college and compete and get a scholarship to go to compete, and we should be trying to nurture as many of those types of sports as well.
Our Ultimate Frisbee kids who played Ultimate Frisbee, parents funded it, paid for it. As freshmen, they made their college club teams. The parents came back and said, we were so excited you got Frisbee started. Our kids are going up and down the East Coast playing Ultimate Frisbee. And my nephews
not
were
getting
in it,
paid
and
to
that's
do
why I learned about it.
That's cool. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. I just want to note one more thing. Mr. LaValle, I didn't wrestle, but my older brother did out in Virginia and Loudoun County, and he was pretty good at it, and it was fun to go watch and engage, and so I have some experience there and think that you're right. It's a comprehensive conditioning support that includes both mind and body in a way that I don't know many other sports do, and it's certainly something I would love to see expanded here in the district. So I appreciate you taking the time to come in from Maryland and advocate for this.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. Wrestling's, like you said, is one of those untraditional sports that anybody can participate in. And it's one of those baseline sports like gymnastics that you attain so many athletic skills.
Yeah.
If you don't decide to wrestle, in high school, a little girl decides to wrestle 4 years, and I've had them. I've had girls wrestle from 5 years old to 12 years old, and they've developed all these athletic skills, and then they decide to play another sport.
It converts right over there.
It does. It's like gymnastics.
I just remember my brother always trying to make weight, spitting all over the house. It's like, come on, man.
That's it.
We've been joined by my colleague from Ward 6, Councilmember Allen. Thank you for being here, and if you have any questions with this panel or want to make an opening statement, feel free.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just be real brief. I apologize. I missed the testimony here. I was actually running a little late because I was at a parent-teacher conference for my little girl. And so looking at these issues are just something I certainly am very interested in, and I appreciate that this is something you've been a really consistent leader on. I'm trying to think through the ways in which we have really high-quality programming for all of our children. And, as I had the teachers explained to me that my daughter has a whole lot of energy and she's running laps in the classroom. Thinking about the ways in which we have that type of, as she progresses through her grades, has really quality athletic and physical exercises and programming. So it's going to be really important. Maybe she'll wrestle. She's kind of small, but I think it's the type of the intent of this legislation to really make sure that we're thinking it through and across the city just have really great programming for all of our children. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to call the next panel of witnesses now with Susan Mottet from DC Now, Aaron Hall, the athletics coordinator for Thurgood Marshall Academy, and Gigi Ransom from We Care Incorporated. I think I saw her here. There she is. And we'll start with you, Ms. Mottet. Thank you for being here and for representing DC Now today.
Thank you. I'm Susan Matei from DC Now. We represent over 950 members in our pursuit of equality for women and girls in DC. I'm here to support the Title IX Athletic Equity Act of 2015. Title IX prohibits sex discrimination in education. Though many think of it as just being about sports, Title IX prohibits all types of sex discrimination. It requires schools to adopt and implement policies to protect students from sexual harassment and sexual violence. It has been the basis of a recent movement led by Vice President Biden to get high schools and colleges to stop ignoring sexual violence when it happens. It requires schools to support pregnant and parenting students. And finally, it requires schools to provide equal athletic opportunity to girls as to boys. Some dismiss that last goal as trivial, but it is not. Girls who participate in high school sports do better across many categories. They are more likely to stay engaged in school and have higher graduation rates. They have higher grades and score higher on standardized tests. They have higher self-esteem. They have better mental health with a lower incidence of depression and more positive body image. They develop the ability to work in a team, perform under pressure, set goals, and take criticism, which are all important to attaining life goals and professional goals. They have higher labor force participation after school, especially in higher skill, higher wage occupations. They are more likely to hold leadership positions later in life. They are more likely to exhibit responsible social behavior. They are less likely to use drugs. They have much lower rates of sexual activity in high school. They are less likely to experience a teen pregnancy, and they experience better physical health for decades after high school. Lower incidence of heart disease, osteoporosis, breast cancer, and obesity, all of which have a disproportionate impact on Black and Latino communities. That is why it is especially tragic that for years, DC has ranked at the bottom of the list of compliance for Title IX, most recently ranking 45 out of 50 states plus the District of Columbia. In recent years, 2 major Title IX complaints have been filed against DCPS because girls in DC are not receiving equal opportunities to play sports or equal treatment when they do play. The next section of my testimony goes into the reason for those complaints, in unequal opportunity, unequal coaching, and unequal equipment and facilities. However, in reading Ossie's testimony today, I was very pleased to see, a lot of that information is about 2 years old, and I was very pleased to see that the DCPS did file a report required in one of their Title IX settlement cases, and did do a lot of the things that they were supposed to do an assessment of girls' interest in sports and start adding sports like swimming. So I'm very pleased that some progress has been made. But the report does also indicate that the testimony also indicates that there are gaps. So I don't want to read the section I had that was 2-year-old information since Ossie has new information.
You can, if you'd like to submit something for the record for this time that's updated, it'd be great.
Sure, I'm happy to do
Thank you,
that.
Ms.
I will say that I would love it if DCPS's report on their progress on Title IX would be made public, because I think a lot of us want to know what progress has been made and where existing gaps persist. But I will say that, the fact of just my testimony having to be completely rewritten today shows that this transparency that this bill seeks to accomplish is very needed, because the public is really interested to know, especially parents, whether we're making progress on this important issue. And I will also say one more thing. I'm not clear as to whether or not the unequal access to fields has been fully remedied. It can be a major infrastructural challenge. However, that's actually one of the easiest things to fix in the interim. When the boys have a well-lit, well-maintained field that's metro accessible and the girls are forced to play on fields that are far away and not well-lit, the solution to make it equal is to say, okay, boys play on that field on even days, girls play on odd days, not to have a two-tiered system. And so I'd really like to know whether or not DCPS has started sharing fields as they try to build up their infrastructure to have a sufficient number of adequate fields for all teams. To conclude, we support this bill and the transparency and accountability that it creates. We do have one recommendation. We ask that a provision be added requiring DCPS to enact a model policy for all schools to protect students who have been sexually assaulted by other students. The policy should outline the process for the protection of sexual assault victims and ensure that their safety, both psychological and physical, is protected under these circumstances. I don't have data on this, but there have been some very horrifying stories coming out of DCPS schools of students who were sexually assaulted by another student being harassed and intimidated. And I think one DCPS teacher quit her job because she was so horrified that the school just let it all go on. So that we would like to see some model transparency policies on sexual assault. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Ms. Matei. Mr. Hall?
All right.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm the athletic coordinator for Thurgood Marshall Academy. The school is located in the Anacostia neighborhood. We have about 400 students. To provide the students with a complete high school experience, we do provide athletic opportunities. We offer 5 co-ed sports: swimming, track and field, flag football, ultimate frisbee, and cross country. We also include boys and girls basketball as well as girls volleyball. We actually do a lot to try to include our girls in our athletic program. One of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of times the girls come out and they have never had any any training at all. So a lot of times when they are competing with other students who have, they get disinterested because their skill level isn't up to par. So it's hard for our coaches to maintain a team throughout the season. One of the issues that this bill brings up is that those numbers would not highlight those nuances of trying to run an athletic program. It would just say we have this amount of students and this amount of students participating in a sport, but whether they were ready to participate or if they had the training to do so would not be captured in that report. This Thurgood Marshall Academy is a single location, so all that would fall on the staff of that organization. It wouldn't not be spread amongst any other, so we would take on that burden that we already have with trying to run those programs. So that is the standpoint that we have, that it would put an additional burden and cipher some of the resources away from the athletic programs to maintain this report. So thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ms. Ransom.
Yes, hi.
Good afternoon.
Albert Giggy Ransom, Ward 5 resident, former Ward 6 resident, and a commissioner in both wards. But on top of that, I am considered and honored to be called a Title IX baby. I competed there from the start. I was here at Federal City College as a student athlete on the women's basketball team. And prior to that, in high school in New York City, me and a friend that went to another school were responsible for getting the girls' public school athletic league girls basketball program league going. It was a club level, so I have upfront, close, and personal experience with Title IX. The feminist movement empowerment statement was, "We've come a long way, baby," has had significance since this is the 42nd anniversary of the signing of Title IX. And just for the record, the mother of Title IX was the late Congresswoman Patsy Mink from Hawaii, and Title IX is now named after her. There was a time here when I was here in the 70s and whatnot with DCPS, and the other schools had thriving, highly recognized programs, sports programs, athletic programs for girls. We have, even out of H.D. Woodson High School came Jamil Elliott, who started at the University of Connecticut, UConn. But not only was she a student athlete there on the women's basketball program, she was also a scholar All-American. We also have other Olympians here, female Olympians, Esther Stroy, Robin Campbell, Ward 6. Both of them were very young, 13 and 14 years old when they were on the Olympic team. Both of them were on the 1980 Olympic team that did not compete, along with other Olympics. And also Sheila Ingram was a track and field star, and that's just to name a few. So DC has produced many good women athletes that have went on into the world. It provides, the sports provide a foundation, individual development in that particular sports. You learn teamwork, there's exposure, there's networking opportunities, and of course with the addition of athletic scholarships on various levels, there are also academic scholarships in which you can still compete. There's kind of been a decline over the years for whatever reason, and I think that was brought about, quite frankly, when the NCAA took over women's sports from the Association of Intercollegiate Athletics for Women, and I brought in a lot of male coaches that really didn't understand the game of women's sports and various sports, but they saw the money aspect of it to being paid that needs to be, I think that needs to be addressed. We have many women here who are qualified to coach sports, particularly at DCPS. But let me just add some recommendations to my testimony. for Section 3, number 6 at line 50, conclude the line items for footwear and practice uniforms. I don't know about I think you said something about just uniforms, but there's a whole lot more to getting prepared to compete. And the various uniform type equipment that you also need. May I also add about the sports medicine. I don't know what has already been in place, but we need to take a look at some of these injuries, particularly the knee injuries, if some type of a committee can be formed to support that, if we're going to start taking this to a higher level with more exposure. Section 3.13, line 73, regarding scholarships, include reporting on not only the athletic scholarships, but the academic scholarships that are offered. I feel that there's time to look at getting involved with the different international sports exchanges. My college team was part of international diplomacy when we played against China, just before President Ford went over to China. Can create an advisory committee composed of former women athletes at various levels in various sports to provide guidance, maybe a summit or something to meet twice a year as this continues to evolve. And also maybe a forum, conference, whatever. So there can be better insight. Most of the insight over the years since the NCAA took over in 1983 basically have come from men. AIAW no longer exists. Now is doing other things, but they're trying to stay on top of this. It is about exposure. That will also help. Chairman Grosso, you mentioned about not knowing. How do we find out? Well, if you provide those opportunities for clinics, or like I said, meetings with going to the schools, talking to the girls and whatnot, you'll be surprised. We have a women's football team named the DC Divas, who recognized my team last year for what we did. And there's other non-traditional sports, as I'll call it, that our girls may be interested in to help provide guidance, and also look at maybe having the Colgate Women's Games, which were the track and field games that were set up in New York back in the 70s, that provided the girls with opportunities to run. It was a great event. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ransom. Thank you, all three of you. I just have a couple follow-ups. Ms. Matei, you mentioned field access, and it seems like that's a low-hanging fruit issue, but it's in fact one of the most complicated things in the history of the District of Columbia. And we have been working in the Transportation and Environment Committee, which has DPR and other committees, to try to better coordinate this effort. And in fact, there is, I think, a new database being developed that will actually do field management in the District of Columbia, which will include DCPS fields. And at that point, what you're saying will become possible. And I don't know if it was possible before, but I think it will be, and it's not a bad idea.
May I add something?
Yes.
It's possible to switch years, until we can switch days. It's
Right.
possible to say, hey, girls get the good field for a year, because boys had it last year.
Couldn't agree with you more. And I think it's not hard to implement the idea if we can really know what's actually there. I think some part of it is the coaches are aware from one level and not from another. But anyway, I totally agree with you. In addition, your question around sexual assault reporting is interesting to me, and I'm wondering if you can give me something in writing around that, just so I can better understand the connections, because I understand that it's still a part of Title IX, and so that's where you're seeing the germaneness, and I think that's important, but I need to better understand it. So can you submit something in writing on that and just kind of propose what you think would be the best approach?
I'm happy to. I did, for the DCPS oversight hearing, I did submit some outlines on what Title IX currently requires and
think I
DCPS
remember
isn't
that,
doing.
yeah.
However, I can submit you a new fresh copy.
That's great. Just make sure we have it at the
Will do.
committee. I'm sure it's in the committee, but to connect it to this hearing would be great. I also, Mr. Hall, appreciate the work that you guys are doing to try to make sure that you are already in compliance at Thurgood Marshall. I know that it was a struggle for many schools just to get some place to play and just to actually find a gym or find a field, and that's a challenge, and I know it's a particular challenge for charter schools. And I know you have a partnership with Savoy Elementary there to co-locate some uses in their gym. which I think makes it more possible. What age do you start? So you're 9th through 12th, right?
Correct.
So you kick in right when they get there, encouraging them to join teams?
Right,
Do you have any
correct.
requirements that they join teams?
No, we don't have any requirements that they join teams. All the teams are open for every grade level.
Right.
There's no,
Is
junior,
there
senior.
boys teams and girls teams separated out, or most of them
Only
co-ed?
for basketball.
Only
The rest
basketball.
of the sports are co-ed. So we haven't had to cut anyone from any of the other sports like cross country, track,
Right.
swimming, or anything like that.
I wonder, I know that sometimes girls would rather just compete with girls, so you might consider that, like especially with volleyball.
Yeah.
If you can.
I'm sorry,
do it.
volleyball is
There isn't all girls with volleyball? Well, I think, it's one of these things where you have to stay at it on, it's nonstop.
Right.
The reporting requirements, if I have it my way, we're going to move forward with them. So the best thing you could do is communicate with me to make it easiest for you, whether it can be done electronically, whether it can be done, in a very standard form, something like that, so that it's not a huge burden on time.
Okay.
But this data is, I think, too important across the city that we can't not collect it. And so we just have to figure out the way to do it that is smooth and easy and not a huge burden on you in order to make sure we're on top of what's going on.
Right, I understand that.
And it sounds like you guys are making a pretty concerted effort over there already.
Right.
So you'll be in compliance most likely. It's just a matter of knowing what's there across the board.
Right, and having the hours to put into that data.
That's the
Yeah.
challenge,
Yeah.
So if you can do it in a smooth way that's not total burden, that would make sense to me, and I would support that, trying to get the right way to submit the data.
Okay.
We don't want to create enormous burdens, but at the same time, this is too important issue not to collect the data and understand it. And then what happens is schools then can see each other in comparison to each other, and eventually you'll say, my gosh, we're not nearly doing half of what we thought we were doing. And, even though they were trying to do a great job, they just see themselves in comparison to another school that's doing what you're doing or another great school, and it makes it easier for them to then say, I need to improve and improve quickly.
Right, okay, I understand that.
And then, Ms. Ransom, thank you for being here again and offering your personal perspective on this issue. Clearly, you have a vast knowledge on just what it means to have the opportunity to compete, and I appreciate that. And certainly, your suggestions we'll take into consideration. I think the idea of having some all-female, all-woman advisory group that's actually been impacted by Title IX or by, what's the rep, Miss Mink, Patsy Mink, Equal Opportunity in Education Act. That would be, I think, something interesting to contemplate, so we'll work on that in the committee as well.
Okay.
And thank
Yeah,
you.
Thank you. And if you're looking for additional information on how this has evolved, the Feminist Majority Foundation has a website that has information on education equity, along with the Department of Justice.
I've seen them.
You've seen them
Oh, yes.
both? Okay. And, just let you know, it's possible even to help this evolve. You may not want to play on the high collegiate level, so to speak. It may not necessarily have to be varsity, but set up club levels
Or JV.
within the schools, or JVs. Because what I see as I watch a lot of the sports, ones that I didn't major, fundamentals are lacking. And I think, too, that's the interest, and then to be able to learn. I have a high school championship girls basketball team in Florida. That I coached, that had went to the championships 3 times, upper bound program, state. It was big at that time. And when I got there, I was called in when I was living in California and was asked to coach this team. Well, we won the championships. Why? Because I focused on the fundamentals of the game. So if we can still begin to start implementing those kinds of things, because like I said, DC, the recruiters used to come here from all over. Especially for the women. And we need to return to that and get that rankings in that area like we've done in business and government, social levels, where we're ranked number 1 and whatever. But sports will be invaluable, especially some of the related issues, negative issues that we're dealing with.
Thank you, Ms. Ransom. I appreciate that. I will note there is a Title IX working group that's supposed to be meeting. It hasn't met since last year, and
There is.
that's something frustrating, but I don't know what the makeup of it is. We're still digging into it.
We'd like to be on it.
All right, we'll make sure that's on the record. Well, it is on the record.
Okay.
Mr. Allen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you all for your testimony on this. Just a quick couple of follow-ups to what the chair had been talking about. Ms. Mateo, really appreciate you talking about the fields. We can't build enough fields. Actually, I think we have such demand for them. But I do look at where we make significant investments, and I can think of Eastern High School. absolutely fantastic field, and it is predominantly used by our football program, our boys football program. And it's hard to work to have the school and everyone else recognize that that's a field and it's an amenity that we want to be using for all of our athletics, whether it's going to be a women's soccer or anything else, to make sure that it's not viewed as this is just a football field, but it really is great space that can accommodate all of that. So that was really important. And Mr. Hall, you talked a little bit about students beginning their athletic program kind of without those fundamentals, without some of those the skill set, and then getting frustrated and kind of walking away from that opportunity and from that sport. One of the things I like about the legislation is it has the mayor creating a 5-year strategic plan of trying to think through how do we help achieve a lot of the goals that we've outlined here. And I was curious, from your perspective, I think we have, how do you look at the pipeline? And what I mean by that is we have interest in sports that is booming, in particular, girls soccer, for example. And a lot of families and a lot of the girls don't find soccer in their school necessarily. And so we have a lot of, our nonprofits and our volunteer groups and clubs that just have to be created to help create the capacity for that sport. How do you, from a school perspective, do you work with or kind of look to see what is that pipeline of sports where we're seeing a lot of the students at a younger age, but they're going to be coming and will eventually be in your halls and in your classrooms? How do you help evaluate what that pipeline looks like to then help think about the programming that you want to make sure you offer to the students?
I think that pipeline, from what I would gather, is that because those programs are outside of the school, these children kind of gravitate away from the school. So they either leave the city or they go to a private school, but they don't continue that on to the public school or the charter schools because they just don't have that opportunity. And I understand that this legislation would kind of try to get everyone in that same path, but I think ideally it would be great to have those opportunities within the school. So that's identified with the school so that they continue to progress through the public school and the charter schools, and we are actually able to pull from these students and say, oh, we have enough students to field a team or even a JV team as well. So I think just bringing those opportunities within the school system would be ideal, just so that those kids aren't being pulled away from the schools.
I think that's exactly right. I think that we have, there's two parts of that. One is thinking through what is that interest area that's coming up, so that when you're looking at the lower grades, just using your school as an example, of trying to anticipate what's coming to make sure you've got programming there. And then, of course, there's the physical infrastructure of making sure that you've got the fields and the equipment and all of that. And I guess that's where I see having the mayor help create that strategic plan to be thinking through. I'd love to think through a little bit more, how do we have that strategic plan include the things that aren't necessarily within our schools, but that we see we're having to create all these clubs and all these outside entities to help meet the demand. Because ideally, I'd love for each of these schools to be able to have that programming, be able to have that student find what they're looking for. And I think that helps grow the sport, helps grow the team, and then helps grow their experience as a part of that school and a part of the school community. So I'm sure I'll keep asking some of those questions with Aussie and others. But I appreciate your perspective of talking about how your school tries to meet those demands, but also experiences the frustration if you haven't had that type of experience on the way in.
Right.
So thank you all very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. We'll call the next panel. Ms. Dana Richard, DC parent. Sorry. Amanda Borden, Managing Director of Strategic Initiatives at KIP DC. And Joe Taylor, Executive Vice President of Capital Athletics Association. Is Joe Taylor here? Well, I have one more chair, and this is the last panel, so if there's anybody else that wants to testify that's in the room that hasn't gotten signed up on the list, now's your chance. This is your last chance. Would you like to testify? Yes, I would. Please, take a seat. We'll start with you, Mr. Richard.
Okay.
Whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Council Member.
You're welcome.
Good morning to the committee. And my name is Dana Richard. I am a parent with a daughter in second grade in the DC schools. And that is what made me interested in this topic, because I would like to see the widest range of athletic opportunities for her as she progresses through the school system. There were excellent comments from all the panels. I don't want to repeat, I want to try not to repeat things. So I wanted to briefly address a couple of the questions that came up and see if I can fill in some of the gaps. There actually, a gentleman, Mr. Lavalley, mentioned a couple world-class athletes, student athletes that came out of the DC area, Helen Maroulis and Nicole Woody. Each one is, I believe, a five-time national champion in freestyle wrestling, and they also wrestled folk style in boys teams right around here. Nicole Woody is from Anne Arundel County, and Helen Maroulis is from Montgomery County. So they're right over the border. It is a big sport in this region, and particularly in Virginia this year. Virginia Tech took 10th place in the NCAA tournament. And also UVA and Old Dominion, I believe, also were in the top 20. And of course, American University has had a phenomenal team. They took 5th in the nation, Division I, in 2011. And that was just a remarkable thing to happen to a school anywhere in this area, because no team in Maryland or Virginia has ever performed that well. I believe the wrestlers at AU are the top performing students. You can check with the academically at American University of all the sports programs. And so sports in general do help with academic performance. There's no question about that. I wrestled in college, and my grades always went up during the wrestling season. And the first time I wrestled I was a sophomore, and I just discovered that they had a team at the University of Massachusetts, and went out, made the varsity, and then I got a 4.0. And there's no way I could have done that, I don't think, without the structure and discipline of a sport like that. In the wake of Title IX's original passage, a number of sports were cut out of athletics at the collegiate level, and then as a result, consequence, cut out of some of the high schools, including some of the DC schools. Wrestling would be one of those sports. So this legislation, it wasn't cut out completely. It still is thriving among the private schools in DC. But this legislation is a unique opportunity because now women's wrestling is recognized as a legitimate sport from elementary through the collegiate level and beyond. And it's the.
Can you wrap it up, please, sir?
Yes. I did want to address that question you rose about the interest level. Since 1994, we can look at the interest level in DC as a reflection of the interest level at the national level, because every state in the country that has developed women's wrestling and sponsored it, there are 10 states now that sponsor it statewide for the public schools. The turnout has been amazing overnight. Like in New York City, the Public School Athletic League established both folk style and freestyle wrestling for girls. And within 1 year, there were 10 to 30 girls on each team. So unless DC is different from any other jurisdiction, I would expect the same results to occur here. And one last comment I wanted to mention. The National Organization of Women mentioned about the NCAA. They're mentioned, I believe, in Section 7. I would recommend also including the Women's Collegiate Wrestling Association, because they govern wrestling at both the high school and college level, and they helped implement wrestling all throughout Texas and California.
Thank you,
and,
Mr.
and
Schmidt.
Oregon.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank
Ms. Borden.
Hi, good afternoon, Councilmember Grosso and members of the committee. My name is Amanda Borden, and I am the Managing Director of Strategic Initiatives at KIPP DC, where we serve over 4,500 students in grades pre-K 3 through 12 in campuses located in wards 5, 6, 7, and 8. I'm also testifying on behalf of Achievement Prep, Capital City, Center City, DC International School, DC Prep, Friendship, IDEA, Thurgood Marshall Academy, and Washington Latin Public Charter Schools. Together, we represent over 14,000 students, over one-third of the charter enrollment, and I think that's about 20% of the total public school enrollment as of the 2015 enrollment audit. The Title IX Athletic Equity Act of 2015 would impose onerous reporting requirements on local education agencies that are already working with limited resources while doing little to actually improve gender equity in athletics at our public schools. The Title IX legislation has three basic requirements, or Title IX, the federal Title IX has three basic requirements. Schools must offer male and female students equal opportunities to participate. Schools must allocate athletic scholarship dollars equitably. And thirdly, schools must provide male and female athletes with equal benefits and services. The reporting requirements of the bill as written ask for data that is largely unrelated to these requirements. Among these are not only the number of students participating in athletics by team, gender, and race, but also the number of coaches, athletic directors, athletic staff, trainers, and medical service providers at each school, their titles and compensation, their gender and race, their employment status at the school, their qualifications and experience, their duties at the school, funding sources for all athletic programs at the school, expenditures on capital improvements at the schools, expenditures for travel, for equipment, for uniforms, for publicity and recruitment, for awards, banquets, insurance, and any other expenses. It also requires reporting on each team's practice and competition schedules, each team's win-loss record, the amount of training provided to employees on Title IX compliance, the availability of academic support for athletes, the conditions and locations of all athletic facilities, the academic success rates, graduation rates, college attendance rates, and scholarship acceptance rates of all student athletes by gender, race, and level of athletic competition. According to the U.S. Department of Education, schools are acknowledged to be providing equal participation opportunities to their male and female students if they meet one of three prongs on a three-part test. One, athletic participation opportunities for males and females are substantially proportionate to their respective enrollments, or the school has a history and continuing practice of expanding athletic participation opportunities for the underrepresented sex, or the school has fully and effectively accommodated the interests and abilities of the underrepresented sex. LEAs can much more easily provide information on how they meet one of these three prongs than the extensive data reporting required by the bill. The Public Charter School Board provided professional development and technical assistance related to Title IX compliance to charter LEAs during the current school year, and will include the Title IX audit as part of the LEA compliance reviews during the 2015-2016 school year. The oversight relationship that the Public Charter School Board has with charter LEAs is more than sufficient to ensure that schools examine, evaluate, and adjust their approach to gender equity, both in athletics and in other areas covered by Title IX. There are also a number of provisions in the bill that are redundant. Federal law requires state education agencies to have a Title IX coordinator. OSSI hired Marie Rudolph in November 2013. Schools are required to have Title IX coordinators as well. The Public Charter School Board ensures that DC public charter schools have Title IX coordinators. Schools are required to have clearly defined compliant procedures. PCSB reviews public charter school handbooks to confirm that these are included and shared with families. Gender equity in athletics, as well as other provisions of Title IX, are important. If the council is interested in increasing athletic access and participation for girls in our public schools, there are other ways that the council could have greater impact. Allow the state Title IX coordinator the time, space, and resources necessary to collaboratively develop a state plan for ensuring equitable access. Ensure that surplus DCPS buildings are reserved for educational use, as they often have field space and gymnasium space that are unavailable in other types of buildings. Work with the Department of Parks and Recreation to ensure that schools have equitable access to community fields for practices and games. Encourage the development of athletic programs for students and communities prior to high school, ensuring that there are ample talent pools to seed competitive sports teams in high school. Overall, a programmatic approach to gender equity in athletics will do far more for female athletes in public schools than burdensome, unfocused, and ineffective reporting requirements. Thank you for your time and attention today. We look forward to working with you to ensure gender equity in athletic participation in district schools as required by Title IX.
Thank you very much. And if you could identify yourself, and please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Katya Ekimian. I wrestle for Woodrow Wilson High School. I've been wrestling since middle school, and this is my 3rd year varsity lettering. I just wanted to say that I do know girls that are interested in the sport, but they just haven't given the opportunity, knowing that, like, I've worked hard in my training, but I've worked even harder, like, just trying to be a part of the team. Like, I've never even been, like, I'm the only girl on my team, and, most of the girls, like, they don't even want to try out because they know that they won't be, like, treated equally or even, like, given the opportunities that I, like, have worked so hard to get. I've been turned down from a bunch of tournaments in the D.C. area because they refuse to let girls wrestle against them. And I just want to say, like, I do know girls that would be interested in the sport, and I definitely think that you should.
That's great. How did you get interested in the sport?
Well, I was living overseas, so I was wrestling internationally, and my brother was a really good wrestler, so I just, like, tried it out. And it's helped me, like, improve. I used to weigh, like, 200 pounds. It's helped me improve physically, mentally, academically as well.
So you're seeing the same trade-offs that Mr. Richard saw in academic when you started playing the sport. Would it have happened, do you think, with any sport, or do you think wrestling is special?
Well, just because I was so focused and, like, knowing that I couldn't wrestle if my grades weren't up, and I love to wrestle, so, like, that motivation, like, boosted my grades.
Are you in your last year now? Are you a senior, or are you
I'm a junior, so I have 1 more year.
And you're going to wrestle again next year?
Yeah, and hopefully if there was a girls' team,
I think you probably ought to talk to Mr. LaValle over here. I don't know if you heard him testify earlier, but he might be able to help you get into more tournaments, you know, as you're moving forward in your career, and see if there's other opportunities where people are willing to wrestle against you. I find that pathetic that they aren't willing to wrestle you. I'm like, what are they afraid of, right? They're going to get beat. That's why, right?
Yeah. And it's just that I wrestle at 160, so it's more heavier. And most of the girls that I've seen wrestle are usually around, like, 100, 113. And so wrestling guys that weight is, like, pretty easy, but it's just hard when you're 160 to match muscle, like,
to match it up,
to these guys,
right.
yeah.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you being here today. How did you hear about this hearing?
My coach told me about it.
Coach told you about it?
Yeah.
Well, tell your coach thank you for having you come down. It's really important to have your perspective in this hearing. We'll make sure that your testimony is part of the record as we move forward with this bill, and I think you're a testament to why this bill is so important. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Did you want to add anything else, or are you good?
No.
All right, just a second, because my colleague might have questions for you. I want to thank Mr. Richard for your coming down and your experience, too, and looking out for your daughter. I think that's important and really a vital part of what we're doing here, is making sure that every daughter and every girl has the opportunity to participate at the fullest level. And my father-in-law has 3 daughters, and that's it. And I think he would really appreciate the fact that you were here standing up for your daughter. And I think that's a valuable part of this committee's testimony. So thank you. Thank you. And also for adding what you think the value of wrestling is. I mean, that's really important, too. And Ms. Borden, thank you as well for spending the time and effort to figure this out with us. And it's really important that you are engaging in this level so that we can actually get to what is feasible for everybody to do. I think that the schools that you represent are outstanding schools and are probably doing everything that you can to comply with Title IX in the best way possible, but your schools are not all schools. And so that's, you know, sometimes what happens in the system is that we have to regulate to a standard that's much lower than what is actually happening to try to bring all the schools up to the highest level. So unfortunately, I realize that maybe some of this seems redundant or overburdensome, but what we can do is we can try to streamline it, like I was saying to Mr. Hall. We can try to streamline it and get it to a point where it's less burdensome, but you're still reporting, because I think data is really all we're trying to gather here. If you're already in compliance and et cetera, then it's just figuring out that it's not overburdensome, and we'll work with you to make that happen. And I don't know what that is, but I think that we can actually get to a place where it's not that difficult to get the data before us so that we can make sure the city is compliant. The issue to me is too important to not actually engage across the city on. So I can't assure you that we're not going to do this, because we're going to do it. The question is, how do we do it in a way that's fair, and how do we do it in a way that works for everybody? And I think that's just going to take a few minutes to figure out, but once we figure it out, you'll see it's not a huge impact, hopefully.
We look forward to working with you on this.
Thank you. Councilmember Allen?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And kind of just associate myself with those comments. I appreciate everybody coming in and testify. And Councilman Grosso was joking with me a little bit when I mentioned my daughter earlier. She's only 2.5, so unless there's a 25-pound class, I'm not sure if she can really tackle yet. But I appreciate you coming down to testify because, it's you help provide kind of the role model for a lot of other girls. They're going to look to that. And hearing actually both of you talk about the structure, the discipline, and the challenge that sport and athletics gives you to improve your academics, I think is a really strong point. And if my daughter wants to wrestle when she gets a little older, I'm all for it, absolutely. So thank you all very much.
By the way, the lowest weight is in the elementary, I think it's 45.
I think I got a few years.
Pennsylvania recently had a state tournament with 4 divisions, and it was 1st through 3rd, 4th and 5th, 6th through 8, and 9 through 12. That's 45. And that was statewide for
Hearing on
girls.
wrestling today.
All for girls.
It's actually on Title IX for all sports.
That's right.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate you being here.